Well, hi everyone, and welcome to another edition, I don't know, of Bernina Canada Live on Facebook. My name is Adrienne Gallagher, and I'm an educator with Bernina Canada, so welcome. Glad to have you here today. Today's topic is paper piecing, and I'm just going to wait a moment while the last few people gather in and give you some exciting news about what's happening at Bernina Canada. It's been probably the busiest 2 weeks I've ever seen at Bernina Canada the last couple of weeks. We had Bernina University where we released the new and exciting products coming for the rest of the year and into next year. So look forward to hearing more about those products. We're going to have some interesting webinars about these products, including the new special editions. You'll remember last year were the Tula special editions, and this year we have a whole new crop. It's going to be the Bernina 790 and the Bernina 480 with special limited edition faceplates and gifts featuring artist Anne Lauer, and just gorgeous, gorgeous artwork. So I hope you'll join me for those webinars if you're interested in a new Bernina. And that webinar, I believe, is happening on August 28th, so it's coming up. Hopefully you're subscribed to our newsletter or our Bernina Canada emails, and you'll be invited through that. Maybe I'll post the link on here as well. And of course, if you're looking for a long arm, we just had a new addition to our long arm family called the Q16, and it's a smaller version of our sit-down model, the Q20, just 4 inches smaller. Brings the price down, brings the footprint down, but still has almost all the features that we enjoy on the Q20. So that's a pretty exciting product, and we're going to have a webinar on that as well on September 11th. So I hope you'll join us on that. And those will be through GoToWebinar by invitation, so hope you'll join us. And of course, we'll do Facebook Live again in 2 weeks. But today, we're here for the exciting topic of paper piecing. You might love it, you might hate it, you might have never tried it before, but today we're going to give you lots of tips and tricks on how you can perfect your paper piecing. So without further ado, I'm going to turn to the machine and show you some examples of paper piecing so you can know what I'm talking about. So paper piecing is also known as foundation piecing, and basically use paper templates. You sew right on the paper. It's pretty easy. You get to follow the line. It's almost like sewing upside down. I'll show you all about it. Here we go. So paper piecing, you might have something as simple as this kind of a pattern. This is a small quilt pattern. This is one of the first types of quilts that I tried to make. I'll show you the blocks for this. So here is what a block of this quilt looks like completed. And you just sew onto the back of the foundation, which is this tissue paper. And it's really easy. It shows you all the order that you need to sew in, and I'm going to show you how to do that today. And shows you the colors. This one even shows you the colors of what you should sew, right? W for water and F for fish. So really cool. That's an easy one to do, and this company offers a whole bunch of other things, including like a mini log cabin and mini tree and mini ornaments. And the reason you want to use the paper piecing is it gives you incredible precision, and it lets you create shapes that you would normally be almost impossible to cut out of fabric. So you can see on the tree there's some really long triangles, some odd trapezoid shapes that would be very hard to cut out, and paper piecing really helps with that sort of thing. I'll show you another example. So here's another pattern. This is a flower, and it has paper piecing in the bloom and also in the leaves. And what's great about this is there's just a bit of paper piecing, and then there's lots of background to do your background quilting in. So this, although it looks a little bit complicated, this is a quick quilt to do. A lot of paper piecing can use up stash, use up little scraps of quilts. So that's really great. Yeah, Sandy ordered her new Q20. That's awesome. And Kathy, She's done Judy Niemeyer. Judy Niemeyer is a really big name in paper piecing, and she has amazing like mariners, compass quilts and stuff like that. I'll show you some stuff like that. I really like this Canadian artist. This is Carol Mason. She's up from my area in Ontario, and she makes beautiful, beautiful paper pieced quilts. This is a pillow. You could easily repeat this and make a quilt out of it, but you can see these teeny tiny pieces would be nearly impossible to cut out using a template, or and then how do you get those really nice points without the machine jamming? The pieces of fabric need to cooperate with you. So we use the paper to really help us support the fabrics and to allow for these crazy, crazy shapes. Another really famous artist is Jacqueline de Jong, and I was really privileged to take a class with her. She's got paper piece patterns. So in this paper piece pattern, you would just, the pattern is inside here, and you would need to trace it out on some paper. And Jacqueline prefers using tissue paper, but there's some other options. I'll show you that as well. You can use copy paper as well. Here's another example. So lots of star shapes, flying geese that are curved, really tricky, tricky stuff. And so easy to do if you know how to paper piece, which I'm going to tell you about. Don't worry about it. And then Jacqueline also designed this quilt. This is the quilt I took a class with her on. And you can see the blocks are all very unusual shaped and almost impossible to do without the assistance of paper. So I'm going to show you a bit of that quilt. So here's what it looks like. So this is very similar to the same idea that Judy Niemeyer would do. So a lot of points. You know, these are sort of inset things that are really tricky to do unless you use a paper. And I'll speak louder. Sorry about the mic, guys. All right, and of course you can get lots and lots of books on paper piecing. And look for books that say paper piecing or foundations. So foundation could be paper, it could also be fabric, it could also be stabilizer. But you are sewing to something that's printed for you in some manner. So let me show you what we're working on today. I'm going to show you two different blocks and how to make them. This is the happy block. This is the happy block. Shall I turn the mic off and just use the phone? Okay, let me just turn it off. I think you can hear me now by the phone. Perfect. All right, so we're using this block. It's called I think it's called Happy Block, and it's by Laura McDowell, and she did this on We All Sew. And I'm just going to use this as an example and show you how to do a simple paper pieced block. This would be a little bit challenging to cut out because you can see how there's kind of this rectangle is wider at the top than it is at the bottom. And this piece as well is a different shape. So this would be hard to just regular rotary cut. So she uses paper piecing for that. Great, thanks Pam. Okay, so we have this pattern available for you on Pinterest, or you can find it on We All Sew. It is on the BERNINA Pinterest page, and you just print it out. When you print out a paper piece pattern, you want to be really careful. You want to make sure that the scale is correct, and usually an artist will print a 1-inch block or some sort of scale that you can check that your printer is printing correctly. And once you've printed this out on regular paper, you are pretty much ready to go. I prefer to use foundation paper. I'll show you what that looks like. This is a package of foundation paper, and it looks like foolscap. I went to school in the 80s and we used a lot of foolscap. It's just a thinner paper. It tears really easily. It perforates really easily. So what I did was I printed the pattern again onto foolscap, and I saved my original copy paper one for my file so I can copy as many times as I want. So now it's on foolscap and we're ready to sew. All right, let's get started. Okay, so here's my printed block, and this exclamation block has two parts, the bottom and the top, and then they're sewn together. So we're going to work on the bottom and then I'll show you how it goes together. And then I'm going to work on that cool Bernina machine block next. So this is just a quick primer. Here's a really good tip that I got from Laura, was that she likes to pre-perforate her lines. So if you have one of these perforation wheels or tracing type wheels, this is the perfect opportunity to use this. So what you want to do is run it along the pre-printed lines that go through the middle of the block. I'm not worrying about the edge of the block, I'm just doing the middle of the block. And the reason is that when I go to fold the paper along these lines, it's going to be a lot easier. And the second benefit is when I go to tear this out, it's going to be a lot easier as well. So what's really great about this is we sew on the top side, we put the fabric on the back side. So I'm going to flip this over, and Sarah, you might not be able to pick it up, but the perforations are actually marking that original block. And I know that's the first block because it was marked A1. I'm going to use a little bit of glue. This is a fabric glue. You can get this at your local quilt store. I got this at the quilt store in Newmarket. It's my local store, one of. And then you just place this so that it covers at least the perforations by 1/4 of an inch on this top line. So I'm going to look at the front again. So what we want to sew, I'm going quickly because I know this block, 1 and 2 are going to be sewn together first. So this is the seam line we need to deal with first. Perfect. So we're here. We're going to put our fabrics right sides together. You could pin this, but what I find with pinning is sometimes it distorts the paper a little bit on small projects. On large projects, it's pretty good. Let's try a pin. We're sewing up here, so I'm going to pin way down here. I'm going to try that again. I'm going to put my hand in the way because I'm right-handed. Sorry, you guys. All right. Okay, so let's talk about the machine and the machine settings that we need. Okay, so if you look over at my sewing machine, I'm going to look at the feet. You could use your number 1 foot, but you wouldn't be able to see the stitching very well. You could try your number 20C foot, but you know what? It won't hold the fabric down very well here, so not a great idea. You could use a clear foot. That would give you a great view. There's number 34C. It's got some red markings that show you right where the stitch is going to land. It's clear, so you'll be able to see where the line that you're sewing on. This would be a great choice. But honestly, my very favorite for paper piecing is using your patchwork foot, a 37 or a 97, and that opening is just enough to see our line. So I'm going to flip this over just so you can see. We're going to sew right on that line between A1 and B2, and you see how you can just see it in that opening. Cool. Let's set up the machine. So on the screen itself, I've chosen straight stitch, and I would change the length to something very small. You want to perforate the fabric and you want to perforate the paper as much as possible. Kathy, she suggests using a size 70 needle with 80 weight thread to help perforate that easier as well. So Kathy, I totally agree with you. A lot of teachers say to use a size 80 or 90 needle. I'm using a size 70 needle today because I'm using a very fine 100 weight thread, but 80 weight thread is great too, especially because later I'm going to be doing small pieces and I don't want the thread to bulk up my seam. So that's a really good point about thread and needles. So on the machine, I want to make my stitch a lot smaller, so I'm going to go down to 1.6, which is really small for me. Generally, the rule is about 1.8 down to 1.4. Every teacher is a little bit different. I usually like about 1.8, 1.7. I'm going to try I'm going to go back to 1.7. Now, what's really interesting about your sewing machine is when I turn this off, this is going to go back to my regular setting, which is 2.5 millimeters. And I'll have to remember tomorrow, because I'm going to be paper piecing tomorrow, to set it back to 2.5. But if you have a computerized machine, you can often set this so that it turns on every day at 1.7. And on Bernina, the way to do that is you touch the I button, and then you touch the save icon. Looks like a floppy disk. Sarah's never seen one of those before, but that's the save icon. And now when I turn the machine off and on again, my stitch is saved. It's going to come back to 1.7. So especially like Kathy, who made a Judy Niemeyer quilt, that's a huge bed size quilt. She would have been paper piecing for days and days and days. So it would be nice if her machine would turn on with the right settings every day. When I'm ready to change those settings back to the factory setting, all I do is hit unsave and clear. It'll go back to factory settings. Simple as that. So it is an advantage to have a computerized machine, but you don't need a computerized machine to do this technique. So those are the main settings. If you have a straight stitch plate, you might like a straight stitch plate for this. But other than that, pretty simple settings. Straight stitch, here we go. So we'll go back to the sewing machine and I'll show you how to get this started. All right, so I've placed the fabric. I'm going to sew this one between block 1 and 2. And here we go. I'm going to go right on the line. Now I'm sitting to the side of the machine, so hopefully I get this. All right, and I'm going to go in reverse to lock it. I would. And sew down the line. Here we go. Also, I turned off any locking stitch on the sewing machine so that it wouldn't make that lock. I don't need that. I'm just going to use reverse. All right. And I'm going to cut the threads using my hook control. Done. Now I'm going to come back over to the cutting mat. I'll show you what goes on here. So all you have to do now is open up your block. You could press it with an iron, or you could just use one of these rollers. They work great. And I'm ready to add my next block, number 3 over here. So I'll show you the top of the page. So we're doing block 3. So we fold here. That perforation gave me a perfect fold, and I can trim the excess fabric away. So I'm going to use my little add a quarter ruler, and it's got a little lip so it will rest against the paper, and I can just trim away a 1/4 inch of fabric. It's got exactly a 1/4 inch on that ridge. It's such a handy tool. I had this in my toolkit for a long time and I never used it, and then I was working on this segment and I thought, this is just what we need. All right, so next block is B3 right there. Because I've cut this at a 1/4 inch, I know that's where I should line up my next piece of fabric. I can line it up, I can pin it. I'm going to play fast and loose and not pin it. And now I'm going to sew here on block 3. Here we go. Again, I'm not using the securing stitch. And I'm just going to lock that in. Now, what happens if you sew too far? I'm going to show you. Almost nothing. What you're going to do is when you go to trim, I'll show you this. All right. Our next block is going to be B4. That's what we're going to trim. So back to the cutting table. Sorry, Sarah, back and forth. We're going to press. And now we're ready to do B4, which is over here. So I'm just going to fold it like that. And that stitch that I took that was just like a little bit too far, it's going to be in the seam allowance, so it's no problem. I'm just going to pull the paper so the paper is flat, and that seam, it'll just be buried in the seam allowance and nobody will see that. I'm going to grab my add a quarter ruler and I'm going to trim this down. This is actually sized really well, so there you go. And you would just keep adding and adding and adding your pieces until you're done. Here, let's do one more while we're at it. We can add number 5. Sorry, the number 4. You could pin it. I'm in a rush, so I'm not going to. This is a block that goes right into the edge of the, or this is a square that goes right into the edge of the block. So I'm actually going to backtrack into the seam because I want to hold that. harder to sew from the side than I remember. All right. And this block is just about done. We just have to fold the last side and stitch it on, and that block is done. Let me show you what it looks like when it's finished. So there's our completed block. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 trimmed down, and I made the top block as well, and then you would just put them together. I'm going to sew them together. Here you go. Using that line, keep the papers in. Perforating. Sewing off road today. All right, let's see how it looks. Oh, it looks perfect. It came out great. So that's a really easy block. So if you've never tried paper piecing before, you might want to try something that easy. Pretty good, right? If you love it, you can give us a thumbs up. All right, so now let's take a look at the block that Alessia made for us. This was a really nice block. Sorry, sir. There you go. So I had an artist, her name is Alessia Lebedenko. I'll send a link for her social media links. And she designed this really cool block that looks just like a BERNINA machine. I think she did an amazing, amazing job. So if you're a little bit more of a confident beginner into paper piecing, this block is for you. I'll show you how to do it. All right. And Alessia has made this into a really nice zippered bag. She just quilted the one block and made a nice zippered bag. And that's something you could do with just one block. That's a great idea. All right. So we sent you the link. The link is available on our Facebook page, and I'll link it to the Pinterest page as well. And I just want to go through the pages in the block because she put a lot of detail and thought into this, and I just want to show you what it looks like. So she has the cover, which I've lost with the nice color picture, but that's okay. And then inside you're going to see the block, and it's a finished size 6-inch. But there's other options to make it different sizes. 6 is very small. And you'll notice that the machine is backwards. Because remember, we're sewing to the paper. We're actually sewing on the back side and flipping it over. So it does need to be mirror image if it's a directional object, which this sewing machine is. So don't be alarmed when you open it up and it looks like the machine is backwards. Then she's got a really nice diagram that shows where all the blocks go. I use this and sometimes color it so I know exactly where I'm putting every color. Cool. And then of course she's got a breakdown of the blocks, and then this is the pattern for the blocks itself. So this again I would photocopy onto foundation paper. It'll make it a lot easier. I actually decided to print this at 200% to make a nice 12-inch block, and Alessia's sample is actually a 9-inch block at 150%. So you have a lot of options. As long as you enlarge everything the same size, you can put these puzzle pieces together at any size you like. All right. So the other thing I wanted to show you back on this page is Alessia has a guide on how this is put together. So each block has a little guide on how it's put together. So let's look at block 1C, which is this big block. Block C, which only has 2 parts, 1 and 2. And you just put them in order, 1 and 2. That block is done. Very similar to blocks like E and D. It's just you put 1 and 2 together. It's quite simple. Where it gets more complex is when it has multiple numbers, right? But we just did a block with multiple numbers. We can do it. But Alessia has a guide here on how you might want to put it together. So let's walk through a couple of blocks and I'll show you how my block is coming along. Oh, I forgot to mention, Alessia also provided a really nice full-size schematic. And if you blow it up to 12 inches, right, she even has one for the 12-inch block. Sorry about that. But you can follow along, and you see how I've highlighted it for my background color and for my main color. And this way I keep right on track. And I do recommend, if you're new to paper piecing, try it in the 12-inch size. The 6-inch size was a lot of fun, but it's really tiny. All right. Any questions? No, we're zooming along. No questions. Great. So here's a block that I did. And this was a pretty straightforward block. This is the bottom of the machine. And it's just got its 2 little rubber stoppers. So I'm going to look at the back of this. And you just follow along just like we did before. We sewed 1 to 2. We folded back number 3 and trimmed. And then we attached 3. We folded this back and did 4, and so on. Let's look at another block. So on the last block, we only did straight lines. So here's one with some diagonal lines. And we treat this again exactly the same. Here's number 1, attach number 2. I'm going to flip it over to show you that I've done that already. There's 2 already added. Let's work on number 3. So number 3, let's fold it back. There we go. I'm going to use that add a quarter ruler to trim the white. Now, you can eliminate a lot of the detail in this block if you find it too much. I just find that the details in this block make it really, really adorable and so accurate. Looks just like my Bernina here at home. And then we are going to do black on this. So I'm just attaching, we're going to sew the black corner onto the white. All right, you could pin it in place. You could use glue if you want. If you use the glue stick, don't put the glue right where you're going to sew because it'll gum up your needle, but you could put it on either side. Go to the machine. There's that number 3 line. And I'm just going to poke my head in the way, sorry. And we're just going to sew on the line. And this is my next square, number 4, so I'm going to stop right on the line of number 4 and then back up. That'll lock my stitch in. You'll notice here that I did sew into the seam allowance. And look at this funny seam allowance. This seam allowance is about 1/2 inch. Why? Because I blew up her block 200%, and now the seam allowance is too big as well. So I should have trimmed this down to a 1/4 inch, like a regular seam allowance, but I left it there for our demonstration. Cool. So if I turn this over, you can see that I just pressed that little guy open. It's pressed open. I can trim. I'm going to move over again, Sarah. So I fold back on number 4, trim it to size. Going to use that add a quarter ruler again. You're going to get tired of it. It's a very well used tool. Now, if you were doing the 6-inch block, I really do recommend you use a smaller seam allowance because it really does bulk up in these tiny pieces. You can get an add an 1/8 ruler, and that works really well too. Can't find my add an 1/8 ruler, so I had to use this one. All right, and then I'm going to use my black to go on number 4. Got that all trimmed to size now, so I can just line it up. You could pin it in place, but you know I'm not gonna. Gonna run over to the machine and sew it again. Gonna back up into the seam allowance to secure. 1/4 inch. I'm gonna go into this seam allowance, about 1/4 inch, and cut the threads. I just made a block. There's only a few more to make, and this whole quilt block will be complete. That's it. Just trim it to size. It's ready to go. Let me show you a couple other ones that I made. This is the top of my machine. And here's the little other piece that's going to go in there. So it might look complicated, but it's really only 5 pieces. Just take a breath, have a cup of tea, and it's quite simple to put together. Then this is going to go together next. And I also made the other side of my machine. Isn't it looking great? Yeah, I can't wait to see how this goes. All right, so I wanted to show you how to tackle an especially complicated block. So for example, this block is block G. G block. All right, so you can see it's got the foot and it's got lots of little pieces. How do I get those little pieces in there? Let me turn it over. See how many pieces it is? It looks crazy. So let's look at my copy of the block here. So here's number 1, it's got to attach to number 2. That looks straightforward. And then we would attach 3. That also looks straightforward. But check out number 4. Number 4 just attaches here. And then I'd have to attach 5 and 6. That would be an inset seam. That's impossible. That's going to be, I mean, I'm good, but that's tough. So this is what I would do to this pattern. I would cut this. I'm not going to worry about this until later. I'm going to cut off 11. And then I would cut these apart. And I would tackle each piece separately and then put it together, which is exactly what I've done here. Not at all complicated. The only thing you have to remember is if you've separated these 2 pieces, you need to leave some seam allowance all around the block to attach these 2 blocks together. Does that make sense? You can see that in my sample. I had to do that here where I've cut it apart. So you can cut any of these pieces apart. You just need to add the seam allowance so you can sew it back together. I hope that makes sense for everyone. I can't wait to put my block together completely. And I hope you'll give paper piecing a try. The settings on the machine will certainly help you out. I love Kathy's tip about using a different needle and some thin thread. That'll really help you with those small pieces. I really hope you'll give paper piecing a try. If you have any questions about this block, do shoot us a little message on Facebook, or you can reach the artist herself, Alessia Lebedenko. I'll shoot her information in there as well. And we'd love to see if you create any of the blocks and show us what kind of special edition Bernina you would make. Mine would be a K-facet machine, just saying, just putting that out there. And we're hoping to have a contest maybe about this block. So give the block a try. Look for the contest next week. We'll give you a couple of weeks to make it. And I think the prize is going to be a set of Bernina scissors. So have a great week sewing, everyone. We'll see you in a couple of weeks for another Facebook Live. Give paper piecing a try. Give piece a chance. Bye.